Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we'll be breaking down all 16 Week 2 matchups with a focus on providing you all with some actionable fantasy football takeaways. Hope everyone had a great time watching some live football finally, but as Bill Belichick would probably say if he was, a loser fantasy analyst like us, we're on to Week 2. So pumped to have one of the sharper dudes in the industry on today's show, PFF's own Dwain McFarland. Dwain, what's going on, man?
Man, super stoked to be joining, and yeah, I'm happy to be on to week two with a few of my teams, but there's some I would like to just kind of wallow around like in the glory. But yeah, I definitely have some teams where I'm like, yeah, we're moving on.
I knew everything we had thought we knew over the last 7 months would get, turned upside down in Week 1 because it happens every year. But, it's even though my mind knew that, it's like my body still wasn't ready for it. I just had this like bad feeling in the pit of my stomach on Sunday. I'm sure we had some things work out and those feel good. But for some reason, that guy you faded that you shouldn't have, or the person, my AJ Brown shares felt so good. Just, not the best feeling in the world. But you know what? We'll get through it. We'll move on to Week 2. All we can do now is adjust and do what we can moving forward. So, opening things up, Thursday Night Football, we got the Bengals at the Browns. Browns opened up as a 7.5-point favorite, but we're seeing that already creep down closer to 6. Over-under is down as well from 46 to 44. And I would talk about Joe Burrow first because, look, it was more bad than good overall, but I think we saw the flashes that kind of has everyone excited about what's to come, potentially for Burrow as early as 2020. I mean, the upside and what we saw in that final drive, I think, is what it could eventually be on a more consistent basis. Now, we knew this spot was impossible in Week 1 against Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram with that offensive line. They have in LA still being pretty shaky. So I'm not saying Myles Garrett is going to be that much easier, but this is a spot that I feel confident starting Burrow. I have him ranked in my top 14 QBs going to Week 2. And a big reason why is that rushing upside that we talk so much about on this podcast during the offseason. I mean, 8 carries, 46 yards, and a touchdown. Again, the only rookie quarterback since 2010 to be rookie QB1s, Cam Newton, RG3, Andrew Luck, Kyler, Russ, and Dak. Like Burrow, they all average at least 25 rushing yards per game in college. Do not discount Joe Burrow moving forward, everyone. He's going to be legit. Dwain, hit me with something on the Browns.
Yeah, man, it definitely can't be any worse than it was for the Browns last week. I mean, if you look at them, from a standpoint of trailing, they ran 67 plays. 62 of those, they were trailing. So they were just never really able to get this offense going. So Stefanski came here, brought the new offensive line, added the tight ends. You've got all these toys in the backfield with Nick Chubb. You've got Kareem Hunt, and the idea, right, was to come out and use play action. Really actually just kind of do what the Ravens do, right? Put people in a really in a huge bind with the run game and the pass game, and they just couldn't get any of it going. And Baker Mayfield was just a major problem. So I think this week though provides an opportunity to rebound. I mean, you're going to play against the Bengals. It's a much easier matchup than playing against the Ravens. Their offense is probably gonna struggle. You're not going to be behind, playing against one of the elite offenses, and then the defense as well didn't play bad last week. I don't know how much of that was Tyrod Taylor versus the Bengals defense being good, but they showed a little bit, in the secondary as well. But this week is definitely an improvement, for the Browns, because you're not having to play against Marlon Humphrey, you're not having to play, against just a completely stacked secondary. So the thing I'm looking at, is I think that, what was surprising for me, Ian, is that, in the best game script possibly ever for a guy like Kareem Hunt, he still didn't put up a ton of fantasy points, and that kind of worries me, So, I mean, he does have a clear role, in the 2-minute offense, 100% of the snaps, 3rd and 4th down, and long, 75% of the snaps. But he didn't line up at receiver like everybody thought, only 4 snaps. And he didn't line up on the field with Chubb, only 2 snaps. So I'm going to be very interested to see what happens this week. If Cleveland can come out, the offensive line actually played well last week, I think you're going to see Chubb rebound. I think Chubb's going to have a really good week, and I'm going to be interested to see what happens to Kareem Hunt's role if Nick Chubb is going off, right? Because I think last week we saw the opposite. We know what happens to Nick Chubb if the game's really bad. Now, maybe Kareem Hunt will hold up, but I'm definitely not excited about playing him this week. And if I own Chubb, I'm definitely still getting him into all of my lineups. I'm not going to hesitate.
This was a backfield at the end of last season. They did use Hunt and Chubb simultaneously, side by side, to great success. I mean, Hunt was spending 31% of his snaps in the slot or out wide. down to 11% in week one. It's unfortunate, man. I thought that, the lack of resources at wide receiver 3 and even kind of tight end 2 would lead them to lean on their best 5, which includes Hunt. But so far, again, we'll see what happens there. All right, moving on. I'm not sure who the schedule maker was that decided to put Jaguars and Titans on Sunday and not Thursday, but come on, like that's just a letdown by all accounts. But, we'll have it on Sunday, I guess. The Titans are 11-point favorites, over under 43. This line can't be accurate after what happened last night. I know some of these lines have been moving around since they opened up. I'm checking it right now. It's down to 9. Okay, it is down to 9. 11 was too much. Yeah, I just knew as soon as I said it. All right, so at first, let's talk about the Jaguars' backfield because I wanted nothing to do with it at once Leonard Fournette left. I think my exact words were the answer to which Jaguars running back to pick up now is no, because it looked like an early down committee between Raquel Armstead, Davina Zigbo, and James Robinson. Well, Armstead's on the COVID list. Zigbo's on IR with the hamstring injury, so James Robinson RB1 season, everyone. The guy played 66% of snaps, 16 carries, 1 target. Wasn't the most impressive performance, but he did have a hell of a run in the fourth quarter, which featured a hurdle, kept his balance, broke a couple more tackles. Great play. I'm sure you'll see it 20 times on the internet this week as everyone talks up Robinson. But you know what? To his credit, he was the featured early down guy, and Chris Thompson only had 2 targets. So, we'll take this sort of usage all day. And I'm not saying someone else can't come in, but for the time being, I mean, you can definitely do worse in the flex spot than a guy getting 15 touches per game on a Jaguars offense that looks like they're going to score a few more points than most gave him credit for. So, it's one of those things where I was wrong the Jaguars backfield at first, but based on what we saw in week 1, I am more willing to treat James Robinson in that borderline RB2 discussion. Dwain, tell me about the Titans.
Yeah, man, I think the biggest thing with the Titans is really from an overall perspective. They came out and ran 78 plays, and that's despite being within 3 points 90% of the game. So it's not like they were trailing and they were having to run, a 2-minute offense all of the time, but they did run 2-minute offense on 22% of the plays. They ran, a no huddle on 28% of the plays, which was second most in the NFL or third most in the NFL yesterday. So I'm pretty excited. I mean, is Arthur Smith taking another step forward from a standpoint of volume? Because if he does, that's good for, who you were talking about earlier, A.J. Brown. It may not have been good, week 1, but I think, what I originally thought, I didn't realize how many plays they had ran. And when I was watching the game, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, in an offense that's going to run the ball 50% of the time and only run like 55 or 60 plays, I was like, A.J. Brown is screwed. And then, this data came out and I was like, wow, so there really could be, some up-tempo potentially coming. The only other thing I would say, about Tennessee, I'm still going to, from a standpoint, with Corey Davis, I think, he's a guy a lot of people are going to add, on the waiver wire. And look, he's a former first-round pick. He looked pretty good last night. Jonnu Smith looked good too, but he stays in the block a lot. Even though Jonnu Smith was out 74% of the time into he's out there for a snap 74% of the time, he only ran around 58% of the time. So it really easily could be A.J. Brown and Corey Davis, and if there's enough volume here to support it, that's great. And Tannehill, man, the accuracy looked great. Like if you look at his receivers, the catchable rate for his targets, I mean, it looks the opposite of Baker Mayfield, who we talked about a few minutes ago. So 88% for Corey Davis was catchable, 71% for A.J. Brown. So if you look at wide receivers, over the last several years, I mean, to be open, that often, it's really not that normal. Typically, a receiver, is open, less than what you're seeing from these guys. So, for example, they were all open at least 50% or more. Corey Davis was 50%. A.J. Brown was lower. He was at 29%, but he was getting extra coverage. But Jonnu Smith, 71%. So if you compare that to the league history, for people being open, a typical receiver, 42% of the time they're open. A tight end, 49% of the time they're open. So they're doing some really good things schematically. The game just didn't quite click. I think we're gonna see some big games still to come from Tennessee.
Good stuff, man. Yeah, we can use all that volume we can handle in Tennessee, obviously to elevate the guys, but also because I got to crunch these numbers, but I swear they'd lead the league in touchdowns to backup tight ends and offensive linemen. They're doing the most funky things ever at the goal line. And I can't even be infuriated because it's always fun watching those big guys score. But yes, the more plays, the better will be appreciated in Tennessee for AJB, wide receiver 1 truthers like myself. All right, moving on. We got the Giants at the Bears. The Bears are coming in at 5.5-point favorites. Over-unders a lowly 43. RB3. I would talk about these Giants wide receivers for a second because, Darius Slayton went off week 1. We know he has these boom games in him, but you looked at his game log last year, and him and Daniel Jones alike, they're really only having those big performances against more or less trash defenses. For him to do that against the Steelers, I think shows the kind of upside he has entering year 2. We were talking all offseason about these Giants wide receivers and just, attack them because they were all being priced as wide receiver 3s, and we knew someone could come up and be that wide receiver 1. Well, it looks like Slayton for the time being, but I'm not ready to give up on Sterling Shepard just yet, particularly as long as Golden Tate stays out, because last year when all 3 of these guys were together, Golden Tate was the one taking the majority of the slot reps. And if you just look at yards per route run in the slot versus outside, Sterling Shepard was the 6th most sensitive receiver in the league last year in terms of being much worse, outside compared to in the slot. Some guys like Chris Godwin, Adam Thielen, wherever they line up, they're going to dominate complete ballers. I'm not saying Sterling Shepard can't do some of that. It's a little bit of a small sample size, of course. Any NFL sample size is in a 16-game season, but I do think he is one of these guys that can really benefit from being on the inside. So if there's no Golden Tate there this week, I'm going to ride with Shepard in a bounce back spot. They were talking him up all training camp as the true number 1 wide receiver. I know Slayton got the big week 1, but don't discount Sterling Shepard coming back in week 2 as long as Golden Tate stays sidelined. So we'll see how that plays out, but keep an eye on that injury report. Dwain, who you want to talk about on the Bears?
Yeah, man, from the Bears, the overarching, thing is they, their pace just isn't really great, and they're not, they're not a team that's going to throw the ball a lot if they can avoid it. So, their neutral pace is only 54%. So they are showing their recipe, right? They'd rather go back to leaning on their defense. They want to use the run game. And that's really how they think they can win games. And I think a big part of that obviously ties, to Mitch Trubisky. Obviously, we've got some news today. Allen Robinson, there was the news that he was requesting a trade. Well, then that comes back. No, he didn't really request a trade. But the bottom line is we know that, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's an issue here. Robinson wants to get paid. And so I think the thing that people have to be looking at, especially if you're in a shallow league and you're looking at the waiver wire, Anthony Miller's really the next guy up. If you look at what they did last week, it wasn't great. They really rotated guys, outside of Robinson. Robinson ran a route on 90% of the plays, but Ted Ginn was at 40%. Anthony Miller was at 55%. Javon Wims at 33%. Darnell Mooney had 30%, Ian. So, and your boy, I can't forget your boy. I can never be on your pod and not talk about Cordarrelle Patterson.
Well, he's a running back. He's a running back, so I don't blame you for not mentioning with the wide receivers.
Exactly. So it was a little bit of a mix, but if you want to talk about who, Trubisky looks for, it was still clearly Anthony Miller was second. So he had 18% of the targets. If you look at him, inside the end zone, he had 1, which was 20% yesterday. The Bears, amazingly, man, had 6 targets or 5 targets in the end zone yesterday. And a Jimmy Graham reappearance. I'm definitely not buying on Jimmy Graham. Still looks super slow. Maybe he'll score a touchdown. I'm willing to be wrong on that one. It's not a guy that I'm going to go pick up. But I think Anthony Miller, if you're in a shallower league, he's your definite pickup. Even if Allen Robinson's in play and he doesn't get traded or anything, I think Miller's just the guy that's going to show that he needs to be on the field more. He did it at the end of the year last year, and now he's doing it again at the beginning of the year. This season. So he's the guy that I would put my chip down on. I'll say just real quickly, David Montgomery, played 45% of the snaps, 46% to Tarik Cohen. But the more telling thing is they showed us what they're going to do. 2-minute drill, 100% Tarik Cohen. It's what you would expect. 3rd and 4th down and long, 38% Tarik Cohen, but David Montgomery got out there 50%. So on typical downs where they're not, in a 2-minute offense and they're in 3rd and long, Montgomery could still be out there. That's going to give you a little bit of value from a standpoint of receptions. And in games where the Bears can keep things tight and they're not trailing, I think Montgomery, as he gets healthier, right, he could be 65% of the attempts and he could still get you 10 to 12%, of the targets. I don't think he's ever going to be a huge threat for a lot of touchdowns, but he's definitely going to have his games where he'll score 2. So he's definitely a buy low candidate. You don't want to go overspend on him, but I have no problem, looking at him over the next 3 to 4 weeks, especially with some of the other things that have happened at running back.
If he could even get just 3, 4 sometimes targets per game, we're talking about a poor man's 3-down RB at this point. I love him this week as a tournament pivot off of Jonathan Taylor. Is going to be chalky as all hell. Almost a touchdown favorite at home against the Giants. If that's not going to be the spot to target David Montgomery, what is? All right, moving on. Falcons at the Cowboys. Cowboys opened as 7-point favorites, but people are not having that all the way down to 4 on some books. Over-unders at 50, up to 52. So we're expecting a shootout and the Falcons to keep it a little bit closer. And why not after that week 1 performance? I mean, okay, you call it garbage time. I call it fantasy goodness because Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones are 1 and 2. Okay, Julio's 1, Ridley's 2, but top 2 in air yards in the entire league after 1 week. Absolutely unbelievable. The 2019 Chris Godwin, 2020 Calvin Ridley comparisons are looking fantastic through 60 minutes. Julio's going to Julio. I mean, we kind of knew that was coming, but interesting guy that was also popping up on the box score, Mr. Russell Gage. And he was one of these guys where I never quite had the courage, I guess, to tweet out during the offseason, which is amazing because I tend to tweet about freaking everyone. So it's amazing I never got to Russell Gage, but he had a nice stretch last season after Sanu was traded. I mean, you look at these targets to end last season: 9, 5, 4, 10, 9, 4, 6, 6, 13. I mean, consistent usage. And okay, he's not Ridley good. He's not Julio good. But you look at this offense, all they brought in over the offseason was Treadwell, who they then cut. We have Hayden Hurst, who's, kind of, I think he'll be more involved in future weeks. But it's a very shallow offense. And, God forbid Ridley or Julio does miss time, all of a sudden Gage is really looking like an auto start. So not many offenses can enable 3 fantasy relevant guys. I'm not saying Gage is going to be all that consistent, but, 12 targets, over 100 yards week 1. I wouldn't ignore it, particularly on an offense that is apparently going to throw the ball around as much as these guys. So not the worst guy to have on your bench in case you need a start at the end of the day. Another high-powered offense on the other side of the field, though. Dwain, tell me about the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, Zeke's going to thrash the Falcons, but I don't think that's going to be news to anybody. I mean, and if anybody was worried about Tony Pollard, actually being a thing, which I did see some on Twitter, he was on the field for 92% of the rushing attempts, 95% of the 2-minute work, 86% of 3rd and 4th and long, 100% of the carries inside the 5. He's getting every high leverage touch. There's nothing that you're going to lose from Zeke to Tony Pollard this year if you were worried about that. But the big thing is absolutely CeeDee Lamb, man. 83% of Dallas' snaps were in 11 personnel. I talked about it this offseason. I think they're one of the lead candidates, to lead the league in snaps and 11 personnel this year. And now you've got Blake Jarwin injured, so there's just going to be more and more targets funneled to CeeDee Lamb. And I think you already saw it. Gallup's going to face some of the tougher coverage whenever Amari's not being shadowed. So on the plays where Amari didn't have Ramsey on him, it was Gallup because Lamb's protected on the inside. So Lamb ran a route on 89%, of Dak's dropbacks, had 20% of the targets, and he's a guy that we know has run after the catch ability. He has that big play pop that can happen at any moment. He's also going to be utilized more inside of the red zone. So CeeDee Lamb is a guy that, I'm just going to continue, to stick with, even in some of my more medium-sized formats, definitely in my deeper leagues where you got to start 2 flexes, things like that. I'm not going to hesitate to get him in the lineup. The one other thing I like, which is always great, if you have a receiver with the kind of talent he does, is 43%, of the time he was in a route, primary coverage was via linebacker or safety, which is just a complete mismatch.
That's a hot stat right there, man. Hell yeah. All right, Broncos at Steelers. Steelers started off 5.5-point favorites. We're up to 7.5 in some books. Over-unders sitting a little lower, 43 in that range. No Philip Lindsay dealing with turf toe. Well, maybe he ekes it out, but not looking all that great at the moment. I think people need to caution expectations on Melvin Gordon. I don't know if there are really high ones out there, but I think Royce Freeman is going to take every single snap that Philip Lindsay was otherwise going to play. He's a good backup. I'm honestly kind of surprised no one like Philly or, Miami, or I guess Miami has Jordan Howard, but one of these teams that wanted an early down back probably could have gotten Royce Freeman for a pretty low round draft pick, and it would have been warranted because the guy isn't bad, but it's just a road spot against a Steelers defense that very well might be the single best unit in the entire league. I mean, holding Saquon to a negative 0.7 yards before contact per rush. I know it's the Giants, but that's pretty tough to do against anyone. So I get it in season long. You're not going to sit Gordon, but, he's got that cheap DFS tag because salaries were released before Lindsey got injured, and it just feels like a trap to me, man. There's a lot of cheap options this week. I don't think Gordon is the one to go after. All right, Dwain, hit me with the Steelers.
Yeah. No, I can totally see that. I mean, and they were already getting Freeman involved last night. Actually, when they got down, right there at the 1 yard line, I have 2 teams with Melvin Gordon. One's a dynasty league and one's another league, where I drafted him and he fell to me in the 5th round. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, because Freeman came in. Now, luckily, Freeman didn't get in. Gordon came in the next play, got to score the touchdown. But yeah, I agree. I mean, Freeman is a back, that I think is going to clearly be involved. Maybe not quite as much as Lindsey, but I think, to your point, it's going to be enough to be really irritating to Melvin Gordon owners who who were probably wrong anyway. Actually, I'm not going to say probably. You were wrong if you thought Melvin Gordon was just getting all the volume. I mean, the coaching staff had been telling this, this all off season, that Lindsey was going to get his. From a Steelers standpoint, there's not a ton. The thing I'll say is in the pass neutral situation, still 69%, passing. So even though they ended up a little more balanced, last night, and even people talked about the running game early, and I think part of that was really just to offset some of the pass rush because their offensive line's not what it was. They were without DeCastro for the game. So they ended up at 44% run, 56% pass, but I think you're still going to see more of like a 60-40, 65-40, 35 in games where it's a shootout. That just may not be this weekend, even though Denver's, offense looked better. It could be more of a game, like what we saw actually, this last week. Now I expect Denver to obviously be much more of an obstacle from a standpoint, of a defense versus, the Giants. The only other thing I would say is if you own Deontay Johnson and you were a little bit, disappointed. I mean, he's still, when you look at, the stats beneath the surface, he still did really good. Yesterday he was out there for 94% of the time that Ben was dropping back to pass, 32% of the targets, and he's open. He was open on 70% of his targets. That's insane because he doesn't get to work. He wasn't working inside. He only worked against linebackers and safeties for 10% of his plays. So he's doing that against cornerbacks. Not to say the Giants' corners are great, but that's his thing. He's a separator, and he was open all day long. And defenses will start to key on Juju Smith-Schuster. So I think there's going to be some interesting days ahead for Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, I haven't finalized my rankings yet, but I'm going to find a way to get Deontay in the top 30 moving forward because, it was looking scary for a second last night. I think he dropped his first two passes. If it wasn't one before, he had a bad one. I was starting to get
bounced off a helmet.
I know, man. I was starting to get these like 2019 Dante Moncrief vibes. And then all of a sudden, Roethlisberger goes straight back to him after the drop. Deontay makes a nice catch. Rest of the game, he was balling out. So, clearly we saw the rotation with Washington and Claypool. Deontay is, if not the number one, it's probably Juju number one, but he's definitely a high-end number two there for sure. All right, moving on to Vikings at Colts. We have the Colts as opened up 2.5-point favorites up to -3 at some books, over under at 46, moving up a little bit to 47.5. Adam Thielen, wide receiver one tour, is off to a pretty grand start. 6 catches, 110 yards, 2 touchdowns, a good portion of that at the expense of Jair Alexander, who, man, I know we're talking about the Vikings, but is there another cornerback in the league that just makes one great play and then just gets roasted like more often than Jair Alexander? If that dude can never put it together, man, he'll be great. But anyway, Thielen, he's not good. He's not an easy matchup for anyone out there, particularly not a Colts secondary that allowed Gardner Minshew to complete 19 of 20 passes last week. I mean, Xavier Rhodes is out there not doing much of anything these days. I don't know who on this team can really track Adam Thielen, and if it is a game where we see the over-under moving up and becomes a shootout, I think we're probably going to see another 100-plus yard performance with a trip or two to the end zone. So, we've had Adam Thielen on this podcast as the wide receiver 6 throughout the offseason. It's looking pretty good right now, and, with Michael Thomas expecting to miss a couple weeks, we are looking at Adam Thielen as a top 5 fantasy receiver. Get behind everyone. The volume's there. He did that last week on only 8 targets. I mean, I know the Vikings are a run-first offense, but, 8 targets could be on the low end of the spectrum when we look back at his game logs before too long. Dwain, what are you liking from the Colts?
Yeah, what I like with the Colts is Jacoby Brissett is no longer the quarterback.
Hey, he got a goal line rep, though. Do you see that?
He did. But Brissett was a guy that literally they just wanted to drive the bus with. So he just brought down, he brought down the pace, he brought down the over volume. It just really was a killer for fantasy teams. Now, Rivers didn't have a great game by NFL standards, but if you're a fantasy player, you love Phillip Rivers because they dropped back to pass in neutral scenarios 64% of the time. That was not happening last year. It was closer to like 55%. So he's the tide that's going to lift, all of the boats here. And I think, the guy that I get the most excited about, and we all have our guys, right, that we probably touted the most, but Parris Campbell is one that I was on all offseason. So, to see him come out there and he was on the field for 81% of the routes, 56% of those against linebackers and safeties, despite not always getting to line up inside. So they're moving him around, they're motioning him, and he operates in the sweet spot, man, where, really Phillip Rivers is at his best, and he's a mismatch. He's just got a lot of speed. He seems to really be, learning the game more because let's remember, he's still a young player. He showed up as a guy that really didn't have to do a lot, at Ohio State. Basically, he was an athlete, and so he's still learning the position. And I think, there's just a really high upside. In fact, Ian, would it really surprise you if we looked up at the end of the year and he actually outscored, his teammate, T.Y. Hilton? For me, it wouldn't. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but like I think it's in the range of outcomes. So, I mean, if you look at him, 20% of the targets, he was tied with Parris Campbell, but he's out there plenty. He's got a quarterback that wants to throw him the ball. The only other thing I'll say, is Nyheim Hines. He's a guy I didn't buy into, but, the easy narrative was, well, Phillip Rivers is here. He's going to throw the ball 100 times to, a running back. Well, you were right. Everybody that said that easy math actually really did add up, and I wish that I owned Nyheim Hines more in season long. Maybe I'll figure out a way to use him in DFS this coming weekend. But he's going to be a pain for Jonathan Taylor. So if you own Jonathan Taylor, just remember Marlon Mack last year actually played really well. I'm not saying Taylor's not better, but he had the great offensive line as well. And if you look at him, he was the most polarizing fantasy player on a week-to-week basis based on the game script. So he had the least stability of any running back in the top 24, and it was all because they like to rotate 2 or 3 guys in. They'll bring in a guy in the passing game. So you're just going to have to deal with Nyheim Hines. Hopefully Taylor can still get 3 to 5 targets a game. He's obviously going to do what he needs to do on the ground, but if they get into these shootouts or they get behind, it's going to be a real pain in the butt for Taylor owners.
Yeah, I was about to say, I do think Taylor is going to win out and be more or less a borderline RB1 the rest of the way. But the things you really got to pay attention to are, one, as you mentioned, is he going to keep seeing 3 to 5 targets per game? Because if so, that's fantastic. And Hines can get whatever he wants. We'll take both those guys to the bank. But we got to make sure one of these Jordan Wilkins or Jonathan Williams or whoever, they can't be a 3 RB backfield because they love to do it. They did it with Marlon Mack at the end of last season. If it's just Taylor and Hines, that's great. We'll have, Gordon, Eckler all over again, but can't have the third guy in there.
With Taylor, he could get a few, right? More early targets, kind of like, what Josh Jacobs did this weekend. But I will say 2-minute, offense, 100% of the snaps went to Nyheim Hines.
100%.
3rd and 4th down and 7 or longer, 83% went to Nyheim Hines. So Taylor needs the game scripts to stay intact to have a shot at those kind of targets each week. So if they get behind, his targets are pretty much going to vanish, and then you're just depending on can he get a touchdown because the attempts are going to be down as well. And again, love the player. Just saying, look at your matchups, especially before you use him in DFS. And season long, you're going to plug him in all the time. Look, you drafted him in the 3rd round, play him. You're just playing him. But in DFS, I'm definitely looking at the matchup each week, seeing how good the other offense is.
Another player that, we definitely got to distinguish between DFS thoughts and redraft thoughts, Christian McCaffrey. Moving on, the Panthers at the Buccaneers. Bucks opened up -8, up to -9, over-under, sitting at that 48.5, 49 range. So the thing with McCaffrey is he only had 4 targets in week 1. All right, he scored 2 rushing touchdowns. He had, 97% of the offensive snaps. He is going to be he might be the number 1 running back in the entire league if he just gets that workload, even with only 4 targets per game. It's not out of the realm of imagination, but I'm wondering with DraftKings now, where we've had to look at this for the last 8-10 regular season weeks, where McCaffrey is priced usually more than $1,000 more than the next closest RB. I'm wondering if that's finally too expensive, because 4 targets, man, we can't have that, because this dude has been outscoring every other running back by seemingly, I think it was 6 points last season on the entire year, like absolute madness. And a part of that is just the fantasy football cheat code that receptions are for running backs. So if he's not getting these just outrageous targets, it's going to be a serious problem. He's not going to score 2 rushing touchdowns every week. And if he's still getting 20, 25 touches, whether it be carries, more heavily weighted towards carries than last year, that's fine. Again, you're never moving him out of the RB1 spot in season long, but I do just wonder, especially this week, like why would anyone pay up $10K for McCaffrey when you have Zeke sitting there at 8,200, who's going to get maybe more targets and this exact same amount of run game volume in a better offense and a better matchup. So, I'm probably digging my own grave here. McCaffrey's going to go out and have 12 targets a week moving forward, but just pay attention to this, because it was, DJ Moore had 9 targets. He's still the wide receiver 1. He had the air yards. He had end zone targets. Don't fret about him, not being quite as big in the lead. But Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel had 8. McCaffrey's going to have bigger days than this, but if he's not getting the 10, 15 target weeks as often as he was last year, might not be quite as worth paying up for in the future. Dwain, what do you got to say about TB12 in the gang?
Yeah, man. What I'm going to say is that all the talk about 12 personnel being their base set, no, it's not. 25% of the plays were out of 12, and that's despite having a gimpy Mike Evans, right? So now they did trail 78% of the plays, so that's obviously going to, push you to want to get players like Scotty Miller into the game, who actually looked really good, by the way, because you need some speed. You need to be able to stretch the vertical, side of the field, especially if Evans can't, truly get out there and run, or he's just fighting with, Marshawn Lattimore the whole time. So from a standpoint, of the Bucs overall, the team, looks like a team that hasn't got to practice, that has a new quarterback that's running, a scheme that he's not used to. And I know everybody's like just, jumping all over Brady. But I mean, it doesn't surprise me, right, that you come out and you have a week like this. So if you drafted Godwin and Evans and all those guys high, I'm not trying to sell low. If you've got people coming to you about them for trades, I'm hanging on unless I can get something I really like. And Brady's a guy, if people just start dumping him, and I'm in a league where I can carry an extra quarterback and I've got, somebody on my bench that I don't really like, I'm going to pick up Brady immediately. I think he's still going to bounce back. It might take another 2 or 3 weeks. If you look at him, from a perspective of, this week he does get the better matchup, with Carolina, so we could see a pretty quick rebound here. My only other thing I'm going to really talk about here is, Ronald Jones. I know he did look good, so I'm not going to, say that he didn't. But many of the things that we saw before, even though he got 71% of the rushing attempts, they still don't trust him on 3rd and 4th downs and over 7 yards. 0 snaps for Ronald Jones. They gave it all to Dust. I mean, LaShawn McCoy. So it just shows you. And if you look at the carries inside the 5, he only got 50%, of those. So that's good because that's what you need. You need him to get the carries inside the 5. If otherwise, he's not going to have a role in the passing game. He's the opposite, right, of Christian McCaffrey, who has the cheat code of receptions. They do not like him in the passing game. So I keep hearing people say they do, and his trainer said this, his trainer said that. It doesn't matter. They see him in practice every day, and they think he sucks at pass receiving. So people can just get over it. He did look good in the run game. So I think, in better matchups, the Saints are tough, man. So he did run well. So I see some upside for touchdowns there. But we also heard from Arians this week that Fournette's only going to get more involved, so you're just going to have to continue to monitor it.
Okay, you're right all around. I will say, take it easy on the shady slander. In these parts, we still appreciate the swag he's carried over the better part of the last decade. But no, I do think you're right in everything you said about that backfield and general situation. Tom Brady deep balls looked absolutely fantastic. I know they weren't brought down, but, a couple of defensive pass interference penalties where, again, in a Panthers matchup, we could see those brought down some serious yardage. I'm going to be going back to well with that heavily in DFS this week. All right. Bills at Dolphins. We have Fantasy's QB1, Josh Allen, with a up to 5.5 point favorite, open to 3.5. Over-unders down from 43 to 42. But yes, the haters said he would never throw for over 300 yards in a game, and Josh Allen has accomplished just that. I love it. I only have him ranked behind Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes this week. And look, he's just one of the most fantasy-friendly quarterbacks in the league. Shows reckless abandon and chucking it downfield. Now that he's got Diggs there, he might actually be a little more accurate. I mean, we're playing just dangerously small sample size season. I get it, everyone, but 3 or 4 passes thrown at least 20 yards downfield were completed. And, if you look a little deeper at his numbers last year and you only kind of looked at John Brown and Dawson Knox deep balls, he was much more efficient throwing to those guys than the rest of the crew. So adding, one of the league's best field stretchers like Stephon Diggs, even though he was doing more short intermediate stuff in week 1, makes sense that Josh would improve. But yeah, everyone, I'm sure I hope you're starting Josh Allen already, but if there's any debate this week, you need to ring him up against the Dolphins. 4 career matchups. He's finished these weeks as the overall QB2, QB1, QB7, and QB1 again. Josh Allen owns the Miami Dolphins. He owns fantasy football in general. I can't wait to keep going back to this well. Dwain, what do you got to say about the Dolphins?
Well, I love where I own Josh Allen, but yeah, then I'll move on to the Dolphins and say, thank God I don't have Ryan Fitzpatrick anywhere, because the wrong Ryan Fitzpatrick showed up, right? And we all know that it can happen. But if you look at the Dolphins, what's kind of worrisome, even though they trailed on 83% of the plays, they never really showed tempo. They never really tried to get crazy with it, even though they went to their 2-minute offense because they had to. The offense just doesn't look very good. They only ran play action on 15% of plays. Part of that is trailing, but as Josh Hermsmeyer will tell you, it doesn't matter if you're losing. If you do play action, people will still always respect it. It's like it's a cheat code. So they've got to do some things there. So Chan Gailey's not off to a real hot start. And if you look at what Fitzpatrick did yesterday, you heard me talk about Tannehill earlier and the pinpoint accuracy that he was showing. It's kind of funny because that's the former Dolphins quarterback. It was the exact opposite, when you look at, what was going on with Fitzpatrick. Catchable targets just weren't weren't good, period. And if you look at Preston Williams, who was really the receiver that was on the field the most and probably the guy that we have the most to hope for, only 33% of his targets were catchable. So he's really struggling. Now, Williams did draw, a tough matchup because once Parker was out of the game, I haven't looked, you may have, Ian, but I know he probably saw some more Stephon Gilmore as soon as that happened. And that can bring your catch rate down because you're going to see more contested. And to be fair, Williams also wasn't open. He was only open on 33% of his targets, where he was targeted. So, I don't know, Myles Gaskin, I guess. Myles Gaskin, anybody? He's evidently like the all-around back there. Jordan Howard is just the banger. Howard got everything inside the 5. He got 3 snaps inside the 5, 3 attempts inside the 5. But Matt Breida, man, I don't know where Matt Breida was. Thank God, for whatever reason, I just kind of got off Breida. Even though early on in the season, I'm like, this guy could catch a lot of balls and do this and that. As draft season went, I just never took him. He's the guy sitting in your tier, and you're just like, I'll wait till next round. You just basically keep waiting until somebody else takes him. So, not a lot of guys to be real excited about here, Ian. But what I will say is Preston Williams, probably going to get force-fed, and if you look at, what Miami can do this weekend, it's not going to be much better than last weekend. Now they get Buffalo. So it's going to be a tough matchup from a defensive standpoint. They are saying they're going to stick with Fitzpatrick another week, which is good for the outside receivers, but I don't know how long they're going to be able to wait, for Tua if this is what Fitzpatrick keeps putting out there.
Yeah, I would say, don't be afraid to scoop up Preston Williams. Maybe Gesicki is available on the waiver wire. Not for this week, but they do get a nice matchup next Thursday against the Jaguars. That's when maybe we can start talking about the Myles Gaskins of the world. But this week, hell no. Yeah. Do not play these guys.
Gesicki got the lone end zone target on the team. Okay. So he's batting 1,000.
One end zone target. That's great to hear. That's exactly what you want. All right, 49ers at Jets. 49ers are 7-point favorites. Over under is 43.5. Almost surprised that line isn't a little bit higher. I mean, look, 49ers, credit to the Cardinals. They played a good game. They were able to get a win. And, I think we're going to see better days from this 49ers offense, though. And I know they're banged up as all hell right now with Debo and Brandon Ayuk out. But, this run game, particularly Raheem Mostert, and I guess also in the receiving game, look at that. He is so explosive, man. I mean, I believe it was next-gen stats, fastest play since like 2016 or something. I might be wrong on that, but either way, Raheem Mostert, he clocked some extraordinary MPH on his 75-yard touchdown catch. Career high 5 targets to go along with 15 carries. Jerick McKinnon shaved off 30% of snaps, 3 carries and 5 targets. But man, when I was kind of projecting this backfield, to me it was going to be Mostert and Coleman more or less splitting early down work. McKinnon's going to steal all that pass down work. The fact that Mostert got just as much pass down work than McKinnon and did as much as he did with it, I think is great news for his rest of the season outlook and potential to stay involved in the passing game. I'm guessing Tevin Coleman's going to be more involved in future weeks where he doesn't have, this uncertainty with his sickle cell thing going on with the wildfire. But, 10% snaps, 4 carries, 2 targets, however you want to shape it, he was the clear backup guy, and they must have felt okay enough to put him out there and make him active to begin with. So, to see Mostert get that 61% snaps, that was not the case really for all of last season. I mean, he only got that in the Super Bowl finally after he, ran all over the Packers. But if he can get that, he's going to be a top, 20 back more weeks than not, regardless of the opponent. Dwain, man, I'm not trying to saddle you here with just the worst offenses to talk about, but you got anything to say about the Jets?
Man, before I said, I automatically, so if you guys that don't know, Ian hit me up. He's like, hey, you take the home teams, I'll take the visiting teams. Well, I didn't look at the schedule first. I didn't know I got the Dolphins
I got you,
and the
man.
Jets.
I got you.
Yeah, I nearly protested. A quick note, real quick on Mostert, just so folks know, on McKinnon, what was interesting is he played 100% of the 3rd and 4th down and 7+ yards, so basically 3rd and 4th and long, so true passing downs. 100% of those went to McKinnon, and Raheem Mostert was not out there. Now Mostert did get all of the attempts and snaps inside the 5-yard line, so that's clearly, who he is. But he could be very similar, to say, a guy we talked about earlier, like Jonathan Taylor, where you need the right script. Now the good news here is you have a really good defense that can give you that correct script. So he can continue to get looks, on the early downs. And, man, they're just looking for playmakers right now. Yeah. And he did look really good, on the play that you talked about where he turned on the Jets. So McKinnon is very involved, though. And like you said, I don't know what will happen with Tevin Coleman. As far as the Jets go, man, I don't have a ton to say, other than the fact that Brashad Perriman and the phantom knee issue that we don't know, what's going on with it, but sometimes it swells up, sometimes it doesn't. He played 100% of the snaps, so I mean, I guess that's a positive. Crowder showed you what he can do after the catch, whenever two defenders run into each other, trying to tackle him. Dude nearly got caught. I thought he was going to get caught about 3 yards away. But Crowder, 38% of the targets, man. He's what you thought he was. He's going to give you a great floor every week. You're not going to be inside the 10-yard line or inside the 5-yard line a lot with this offense, especially not this weekend with the 49ers. I'm fading every single part of the Jets offense. I want nothing to do with it. Even Crowder, if I can get away from it. The positive thing with Crowder this weekend, if you have to use him, is, the 49ers are not a team that's going to come out and run a lot of man coverage. They'll run zone, so they're going to let him do his thing. He'll be open. I just don't see him being able to do much, after he makes the catch. They've got a really good group of linebackers, strong safety play, and if he happens to be outside, well, they've got pretty good cornerbacks, as well.
Chris Herndon, Hive, stay calm. This might not be the week, but second on the team in targets. We'll be okay. Dwain.
Yeah. Hey, the only thing with Herndon that's holding him back, honestly, is he's having to stand and block because their offensive line's terrible. So he played 72% of the snaps, but he only got to run a route 56% of the time because they, have a turnstile, at right tackle that can't block anybody.
He's such an all-around tight end, man. It's just cross the bear. Just real world problems, man. It sucks. All right, Rams at Eagles. Eagles opened up 3.5-point favorites, but that is down 2 -1. Over under 48's down to 46. Makes sense based on what we saw. But I want to talk about the confirmation we pretty much had that Robert Woods is this team's #1 wide receiver ahead of Cooper Kupp. And it's been going on really since the Rams Week 9 bye in 2019 when they stopped running as much through wide receiver personnel and really got down into more two tight end sense, getting guys like Johnny Munt involved and, really starting to feature Robert Woods. And it's just been extreme. I mean, Woods missed a game during the stretch, but in 8 games since that Week 9 bye, Woods has 87 targets, 58 catches, 768 yards, 2 scores, another 6 carries, 58 yards. In that same stretch, Cooper Kupp's in 9 games, only 52 targets, 40 catches, 409 yards. He's got the 5 touchdowns, but nothing rushing. I mean, if anyone's still out there ranking Cooper Kupp ahead of Robert Woods, I mean, just how and why? Because we have nothing but evidence that Woods is a target hog. Woods is getting the rush attempts. I know the touchdowns haven't been there, but it's not like Kupp is just getting overly featured to, a maddening extent ahead of Woods. If anything, Higbee, I think, is the bigger threat for that. So, Robert Woods season, guys, he is a, borderline wide receiver 1, regardless of the matchup. I am looking forward to continuing to fire him up as such the rest of the season. Dwain, thoughts on Carson Wentz and the Eagles after a pretty disappointing Week 1?
Yeah, man. Quick thing here on the Rams while we're there. If you can get Cooper Kupp cheap, I would. The one thing I'll say with Kupp that I was worried about most was last year when they went to 12 personnel, he wasn't on the field at all. Like, he was a phantom. This year, in that first game, even though you couldn't always tell from the way the TV angle, which I hate, it's like too much time spent on coaches. I'm like, man, just show me the all 22, for the game, so I can see what's going on. You know how it goes. But whenever I'm sitting there watching the game, I couldn't really tell. But I went in at halftime and started looking, and then now I looked at it, later this afternoon at the end of the game. He's out there for 85%, of the dropbacks by, Jared Goff. So 88% versus 85% for Robert Woods. The other thing, he was out there for over 60% of the plays out of 12 personnel, where last year, like I said, that was like 10 or 15%. So they're getting him on the field in all the formations. So Kupp is a definite buy low, and I love him in DFS this weekend. I haven't even checked the pricing, but everybody's going to be off of him. But I think he's a definite bounce back candidate, and if you can buy him low in your leagues, I would. As far as the Eagles go, man, the Redskins front four just trashed their offensive line, which we know is hurt and took another injury during the game. Lane Johnson came out and couldn't go through warm-up, so they had to make him inactive. And then the guy, I can't even remember his name now, Ian, you may know, but, he comes out there and he gets hurt during the game. So, and they already lost Brandon Brooks earlier in the offseason. You already lost, your other tackle Dillard, and you've had to move Jason, Peters outside. So, you can't hardly blame them. They've had a ton of bad luck, when it comes to this. So the only thing I would say about the Eagles, as far as, who you could potentially play, this weekend, the word is Deshaun Jackson is going to continue to get, more snaps. Targets 15% last week, for him. Greg Ward had 17%. Ertz had 17%. Goddard had 22%. Now, the Eagles did stay true to form as far as their 12 personnel goes. They ran 12 personnel on, it was like over 52% of the snaps. I don't have it up right in front of me right now, but it was over 50% of the snaps. So that is still their base formation. They're trying to get both tight ends on the field as much as they can. And so it looks like Goddard will actually be safe. I didn't know for sure with the receivers they've added, would we still truly see 50, 60% of the snaps be out of 12 personnel? But I mean, just remember that still can be, problematic. Dallas Goedert only ran a route on 62% of the time that the team dropped back to pass. So that's not a very healthy number. Typically, somebody in that range, unless your name is Mark Andrews, which maybe he's Mark Andrews. If your name's not Mark Andrews, though, if you're running, a route in that percentage, in that range, you're typically not a tight end one. So I would give it a look another week, but I got to say Goddard looked really good, on the deep ball. And this team, man, they're gearing up to pass. Like, they don't care if Carson Wentz is going to get sacked over and over. I mean, this is really, Doug Peterson, going back to, those old Andy Reid days and just saying, you know what, we're just going to drop back. We're just going to throw the ball. I think they should consider changing it considering, what's going on, but I don't know that they're going to. So, we could see a lot of pass attempts. As far as the receivers go, like I said, they rotated in and out, but apparently we're going to see more Jackson, and I think you're also going to see more Jalen Reagor. Yeah. So those are guys that if they go onto the waiver wire this year or this week and you're in a deeper league, I have no problem scooping them once somebody drops them.
As soon as Game Pass gets that all 22 upload, the first play I'm pulling up is that Wentz bomb to Reagor because he barely even stepped into that thing, and that just went 50, 55 yards down the field, right to Reagor in stride. Beautiful play. All right, Lions at Packers. Packers sitting here as 6-point favorites, over under 46 up to 47.5. So not a great look in week one for the Lions. No Kenny Golladay didn't help matters, but, blowing that game the way they did wasn't great. And just the offense as a whole didn't look all that good. Again, maybe this is just because they didn't have Golladay, because they had Quintez Cephas and Danny Amendola being two of their top three wide receivers. They didn't feel the need to push the ball downfield. But, Stafford in his first year at Dale Bell last year, one of the reasons why he was so effective as a fantasy quarterback was because he was chucking the ball downfield to his heart's desire. League high 19.2% deep ball rate, but you go to week one and just 9.5% of Stafford's passes were thrown at least 20 yards downfield. So, man, if Golladay is going to remain out, I'm a little worried going back to Stafford in this spot. Road game, not against a Packers defense that we know can pressure the quarterback, and even if their secondary doesn't always play up to, I think, their talent, they do have the capability of making life pretty tough for him. So, you look at his past matchups, and he has thrown multiple touchdowns in 9 of his last 10 games against the Packers, but I don't like this upside with Kenny Golladay out of the lineup. I will probably be fading Stafford in favor of other quarterbacks in fantasy leagues of all shapes and sizes. Dwain, what do you got to say about pissed off Aaron Rodgers, who started off his FU tour pretty damn great?
Yeah, so the Packers just continue to add, pieces that say we just want to run the ball the whole time, and Aaron Rodgers just says, well, it's still my show. So when the game was close, 63% of the time they were still dropping back to pass. So when I say close, that's within 3 points. So that's essentially a neutral script. Now they led 45%. So, the 58% pass to 42% run is probably a little bit misleading. They're probably going to throw a little bit more whenever they're in games where they're not able to lead as much. And it's kind of interesting, right? Because we just didn't know what, Aaron Rodgers really has outside of Davante Adams. And really the correct answer is, well, it doesn't matter because he has Davante Adams, and that's just who he's going to go to, who had 41% of the targets. That's insane. Was on the field for 98% of the routes. Lazard and Valdez-Scantling did get into the mix. 86% of the routes for Lazard, 66% of the routes for Valdez-Scantling, who did catch a nice bomb. They both caught touchdown passes. If you stacked Aaron Rodgers with these things last weekend, like I did, you had a really good weekend, and you were very happy about, what your FanDuel or, your DraftKings account looked like the next morning. The only other thing I'll, hit on here is Aaron Jones, man. For folks that were kind of closing their eyes and just hoping, that Jamal Williams and that A.J. Dillon would go away, they're not. I mean, he was out there for 53% of the snaps. Jamal Williams was 41%. So whenever you look at the, the splits from a standpoint of targets, he still got his 15% of the targets, but he only ran a route on 43%. Jamal Williams was targeted 10% of the time. So I just think it's going to be one of those deals where you need touchdowns out of Aaron Jones, and he still looks good, when he's out there. They're prioritizing him in the passing game when he's out there. Inside the 5, he's still the man. 71% of the snaps inside the 5, 67%, of the rushes inside the 5. But when it comes to third and fourth and long, he's not out there. Only 25%. Jamal Williams, 75%. 2-minute drill. 100% Jamal Williams, not Aaron Jones. So he's another one of these guys that, man, if the script goes sideways on you and they're not leading or it's not close, it could be really problematic to own Aaron Jones. So just be really careful with him in DFS. If you own him in season long, well, there's nothing really you can really do. You spend a second-round pick on him. You're going to keep rolling with the guy, and he's still going to give you some huge weeks. So, I mean, he's an efficient player. He's always a threat to score 2 to 3 touchdowns in any week. He could get 1 through the air, 2 on the ground. And so, like I said, they still like him inside the 5. The offense looks pretty good. You just have to hope, like, Devontae Adams cannot be injured in any way, because if he does, it's just going to kill this offense.
Yeah, Aaron Jones only had one game last season when Jamal Williams was healthy where he actually hit that 60% threshold. The one good news for Aaron Jones managers should be that A.J. Dillon was just so not involved at all. At least it is still a 2-back committee, not a 3-back committee for the time being. So Aaron Jones, if you have him, you're starting him, and hey, home spot against the Lions, we could be talking about one of those multi-touchdown games. All right, the Washington football team is at the Arizona Cardinals. We have the Cardinals as 6.5-point favorites. Over under is 46.5. Both these squads have some impressive week 1 wins. I want to focus on the Washington backfield because we had J.D. McKissic leading the way with 44% of the snaps. He did absolutely nothing. Peyton Barber converted 17 carries into 29 yards on his 41% snaps. Antonio Gibson, who looked like the best running back out there, 26% snaps, broke twice as many tackles as McKissic and Barber combined. And I don't think it's a matter of if. I think it's a matter of when Gibson's going to take over this backfield. It's unfortunate it isn't happening right away, but, I'm still going back to that Adrian Peterson quote to Josina Anderson when he left, where he was saying, they want it to be Gibson, beat his pony back, get the targets. Ron Rivera and these guys, they aren't dumb. They saw what McKissic did, and it was nothing. So maybe Barber stays involved throughout the year, annoyingly, as this early down guy. But, I think pretty quickly we're going to see Gibson almost engulf that entire McKissic role, and you're going to want him on the fantasy squad. So, people out there, you got injuries going on, but I cannot stress enough, do not drop Antonio Gibson yet just because of that bad week 1 usage. Best is definitely to come in an offense that is starving for playmakers outside Terry McLaurin. Dwayne, Cardinals looked pretty damn good last week.
Yeah, man, 100% agree with you on that. Do not drop. Hold on to Antonio Gibson. You're right. It's just a matter of when. Yes. So the Cardinals, man, if you want to score some fantasy points, one way to do it is run no huddle 55% of your plays. That'll get you some freaking volume. So the third most plays last week out of any team in the league, the Cardinals looked really good. Kyler Murray's going to clearly be running, and man, talk about a guy that doesn't take hits. Like that guy, like his sliding is better than most quarterbacks running. So he looks like he's going to be well insulated as long as he doesn't take like a blindside hit, which is pretty hard when you're you have a rocket up your like he does. Cardinals, I'm just going to say, the biggest thing here is volume. Don't be afraid of Kenyan Drake. Some people are, well, he didn't score a lot of points. Well, yeah, I mean, you can't score a ton of points every week. He did bail you out with a touchdown inside the 5. He had 69% of the snaps, 49% of the routes. So he did give way to Chase Edmonds a little bit. And Edmonds, on 3 of his 5 looks, he was actually the first look, which is not normal for running backs. That's actually a really good tell that a running back is actually part of the design. Mm-hmm. So like when you look at McCaffrey's and Kamara's, they get first looks. Typically, running backs are a check down after a first or a second read don't go right. And so Edmonds, it did show that they're putting him on the field. He's going to get on the field, and they want to get him the ball in the passing game. So that's really going to be his role. But it's not going to hurt Kenyan Drake when you have an offense that's running the volume like this. And 50% of the routes, by the way, is still borderline RB1 if you look at historical rates. It's going to be fine. The other good thing for Drake, is he did have, the 4-minute offense. Now, Edmonds did get the 2-minute offense, but he has the inside the 5 carries. So Edmonds is going to see a little bit of work, but don't worry about Kenyan Drake. If you have him, you want to make sure you get him on the field and keep him in your lineup.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Austin Eckler a little bit last week. Like, okay, it wasn't the big production that we necessarily wanted, but it was nice to get at least one game of evidence that hey, Kenyan Drake and Austin Eckler are still the undisputed lead backs in their respective backfields. Only thing I'll add with the Cardinals, it was pretty fun to see DeAndre Hopkins' usage, and this is going to be a situation where we're going to get to see his yak ability, which I think has always been a little bit underrated, really put on display because they fed him 3 screens in the game yesterday, and if you just look over his career, that's like he's never gotten that chance. I mean, first 4 seasons of his career, he had 6 total screen targets that entire time. The last 3 years, he's had 9, 12, and 9 again. He's on pace for 48 after week 1. Now, he's not going to get 16 targets every week. I get it. Again, having fun with small sample sizes here, but clearly the Cardinals are doing a good job getting him some of those easy targets. I know some, like myself, had concerns whether Hopkins could still kind of demand that 150-plus target role in Arizona. Well, it's looking pretty good after week 1. All right, moving on. We got Ravens at Texans. The Ravens were started at -5. They're up to -6.5. It's up to 7 now, so I wouldn't even be surprised to see that continue to rise. Over under is sitting at 52.5. So I want to talk about this Ravens backfield because I think a lot of people saw the Dobbins 2 touchdowns and are, maybe trending towards auto start territory moving on. And, just be cautious because I think it was actually more of a negative looking back at this than anything. Not that he scored, but just the overall distribution. I mean, we'll focus on the first 3 quarters because things got kind of out of hand early in that one. But you look at the snaps in the first 3 and Dobbins led the way with 18, but Mark Ingram was right there at 16. And the most unfortunate part was Gus Edwards there with 11 snaps. He's not going away. He's been too efficient. He's been really good in this offense. He's a very solid real life player that's never going to give us fancy, jokesters any sort of production, but he's going to take it away from Dobbins and from Ingram. So, it's 1A, 1B, and maybe the league's highest scoring offense. So these guys are going to score touchdowns. There's worse guys to have out there in your flex spots, but I'm just going to have a hard time, ranking these guys inside the top 24 until we see some sort of certainty go out because it looks pretty hot hand right now with Lamar and Gus taking away all these carries. And by the way, not a single target for this entire backfield. It's just like we need to hope for the best on almost like 10 to 12 carries per game. And hey, the Ravens, like Lamar Jackson throwing 3 touchdowns on 25 attempts, maybe just, normal regression rules don't even apply to this offense. And we're just looking at it the wrong way. But I don't know, man. Through 1 week, I am not feeling all that great about, early season potential for J.K. Dobbins. All right, Dwain, hit me with the Texans.
Yeah, man. So just real quick on that. People have to realize that that's just what the Ravens do. They rotate these guys. They rotate everyone.
Yep.
And they keep everybody fresh. So last year, season 1, they blew out the Dolphins. Gus Edwards had 38% of the carries, 31% for Mark Ingram. What happens in the more competitive game the next week? Ingram 39%, Gus Edwards 9%, Lamar Jackson, had like 40% that week. So expect to see it continue to be diced up. I'm with you. Very tough to trust these guys. So, who am I on? Who are the Ravens playing? I just totally lost my spot.
Yeah,
Texans. Yeah. So, as far as the Texans go, the only thing I'm going to say, is a lot of folks were really worried. When you look at Brandon Cooks and what he did last week, and if you look at what even Randall Cobb did, again, kind of like the Tom Brady thing, you have 2 new pieces coming into the offense. The good news is, both of those players were out there. Cobb was in a route on 85% of the plays. You had 10% of the targets, so he's going to be fine. Fuller, was open on 45% of his targets, which is awesome considering, how much, he saw as far as, attention. But if you look at Cooks, they didn't really want to use him, man. They were protecting him. They kept his snap count down, and as the game got out of hand, they just basically kept him off the field. So Cooks, as long as he doesn't have a setback with his quad, I think here over the next few weeks, he's going to be a player that you can depend on more. If he gets cut, I'm very willing to pick him up, except like in really shallow leagues. That's one I'm actually going to be watching for in all my high stakes leagues, just to see if somebody to go grab the flavor of the week. Does Brandon Cooks get cut? And I'm going to be trying to swoop in and grab him, next week. Hopefully he doesn't go off this weekend. So the other thing, the very last thing, Akins. So Akins is the clear tight end 1. We haven't had that. With the Texans in like forever. And so he was out there for 80%, of the routes. So if you need help at tight end and maybe you got Austin Hooper and you're trying to figure out, okay, can I trust that again? Akins is a guy that you may stash, if you're only carrying one. I'd like to see it one more week. If you're in a super deep league, I'm fine. If you got to throw him out there, you got to throw him out there. At least he's getting the playing time. The Ravens do have two very young linebackers that did not look very good in week one. Now, behind them, they have really great safety play, obviously. But, from a standpoint of, a potential mismatch on the field, that's the one place the Texans may be able to find it.
Yeah, I mentioned this on the Monday night waiver wire pod that went out this morning, but give me Jordan Akins over Logan Thomas. I mean, the concern with Akins was he was splitting everything with Fells. Now he's the number one. That's fantastic. Let's cash in on it. All right, Chiefs at Chargers. KC opened at 6.5. That's up to 8.5. Wouldn't be shocked to see that flirt with double digits by the time we get to Sunday. Over-under is a little bit down from 50.5 to 48.5. I just wonder if this is a Tyreek Hill just complete liftoff spot. I mean, we've got film evidence of him roasting both Casey Hayward and Chris Harris over the years. I mean, it's not anything against those guys. They're both great cornerbacks, but the point is Tyreek can beat any cornerback in the league, and he has it done to these guys. And look, it's just been a minute really since we've seen Tyreek just go off. And okay, he had the 67 yards, 2 touchdowns to the AFC Championship. He got to 105 yards in the Super Bowl on a bunch of targets, but 10-game streak without 100-plus yards and a touchdown. That's his longest since his rookie year. I mean, even in the Alex Smith season, he didn't have, any sort of dud streak like that. So he's almost been a little bit more of a boomer bust guy over this last season and a half without as many of the booms. I don't think it's it has anything to do with Tyreek. He demands more attention than any wide receiver throughout the entire league. So, we've seen Travis Kelce popping off for huge games because everyone's worried about Tyreek. So it's not, again, like we were talking about earlier with Antonio Gibson, not a matter of if Tyreek's going to blow up again. It's a matter of when. And I think in this matchup, as good as the Chargers D might be, even without Derwin James, I mean, I just don't think it matters when you're facing an offense as good as Mahomes and the Chiefs. So, I'm going to have plenty of exposure to Tyreek and DFS sites, all shapes and sizes this week. Dwain, what's up with the artist formerly known as Ty God and the Chargers?
I was gonna say you can't call him Ty God anymore, but
Not
what
anymore.
I'll say, the dude still throws a beautiful deep ball, and that works for Mike Williams.
Yep.
I talked about this a little bit in the preseason. That hey, this could be the deal for Williams, but he just was hurt. And what's funny is, man, how many hits did Williams take to his sholdr right away in that game? Took huge hits, falling on it.
He never braces his fall, too. The dude falls harder than any wide receiver I've seen in the league.
Exactly. But he led the team, 30% of the targets along with Hunter Henry, 26% to Keenan Allen. Obviously, the other component of that is the guy named Austin Eckler, 4% of the targets. So this was a potential narrative, is that Tyrod does not like to check the ball down. He likes to keep his eyes downfield. He's also willing to run. So we're going to have to keep an eye on this. The good news is, kind of similar to the McCaffrey thing, Eckler did get more work on the ground. But I don't know how much of that is really going to continue, Ian, because Josh Kelly just took off, man. This is a guy that's had a lot of hype through the preseason, and I don't mean just hype from fantasy analysts. It's the drumbeat's been there. Everything the coaches have said about this guy from the time they drafted him until now, it's like he just keeps on doing the coach thing like Jason Garrett, stacking good days on good days. That's Josh Kelly, and he finally got his chance, because you have Justin Jackson go down during the game, so they're not splitting anymore, and I think he just basically ripped that job away. We could see Josh Kelly in more of a Melvin Gordon role, and they could choose to move Austin Eckler into more of a, hey, all right, we're going to make you like you were last year, which I think we would all be fine with if you drafted Eckler. I'm like, fine, give me 35% of the carries, but give me that 15 to 20% of the targets. And Eckler's a guy that can work downfield, as well. He doesn't have to be, he's not a swing pass guy. He's a guy that you can design stuff for, you can get in the ball, and you can just get that drilled into Tyrod's head. So we'll have to keep a little bit of an eye on it, but Kelly's a guy that if he's on your waiver wire, he should be picked up. I'm going to hold off one more week before starting him. Plus, you don't have a great matchup. They could fall down by a ton to Kansas City, and then it could just be, it could literally be Austin Eckler on the field 100%, of the snaps this weekend. But Mike Williams, man, a lot of people didn't draft him because he was hurt. I know I avoided him, even some really deep leagues. So there's probably leagues where he's on the waiver wire, and I don't think it's a flash. He could get hurt again, but man, he's a perfect fit with Tyrod Taylor.
It just frustrates me, man. We saw this last year where Eckler, even once Gordon was back, was struggling to play 50% of the snaps in games because they had to run Andre Patton out there for 80% of the snaps and give him like 5 targets all season. I mean, why does Austin Eckler only have 6 snaps in the slot or out wide last week when something named Jalen Guyton is, playing all game? So I don't get it, man, because, yeah, Kelly looks great, but Eckler can be like, he's going to draw more attention from the defense by standing out there out wide than any of these other backup receivers they had. I mean, make them think about it. Get a little bit creative. I don't see why Kelly and Eckler, if Jackson's out of the picture, can't both produce. But, not a good week 1 for Austin Eckler, but I do think we'll see better performances moving forward, at least to some extent, because, he's not going to have 1 target every week. We'll get over that hump. Moving on, Sunday Night Football, Patriots at the Seahawks. Seahawks opened at -3 up to 4.5 now. Over and under up from 44 to 45. And look, Cam Newton, QB6 after 1 week, 63 rushing yards on design runs. Joe Burrow had 31, Josh Allen 27, Russell Wilson 27, Lamar Jackson 23, nobody else over 10. So we are truly seeing the Patriots just embrace life with Cam as their quarterback. And why wouldn't they? I mean, they're the team that has built, Belichick his entire kind of career on just taking his offense, doing whatever they do best against the defense, whatever they do the weakest. And this offense, their best bet is to run the whole show through Cam Newton. So that's what they're doing. And I'm not saying he's going to get 15 plus carries every single week, but, on weeks he doesn't have that, I don't think he's going to have fewer than 20 pass attempts either. He looked great throwing the ball. I mean, 15 for 19 and had some drops out there. Ball velocity looked fantastic. Cam Newton's healthy, and it's his game, and it's great. I love it. It's going to be a tough one against the Seahawks, but hey, man, Cam Newton's in every week top, easily QB1. I think I have him ranked 6th or 7th this week, man. We got to get used to Cam Newton back in that top 10 and the fantasy range. Great time to be alive for Cam stands all around the globe. Dwain, hit me with some Seahawks.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Love the Cam stuff, and Belichick's maximizing him. As far as the Seahawks go, I mean, if you're on Twitter or if you listen to anything, you've already been hearing it, right? It's been all over the TV, yesterday, today. It's the let Russ cook. And yes, the team actually did finally let, Russ cook a little bit. So if you look at the Seahawks this last week, even when the game was close, so past, a neutral situation, 71% of the time they were throwing the ball. That's a really good, sign for Russell Wilson. The bad news is it's still Schottenheimer, and he still runs a really slow offense, only 58 plays. It's always one of the worst in the league as far as the volume of plays. So that's not changing, but it's still, hey, we'll take it. Russ is going to throw the ball more. They've been talking about it, and it looks like it's actually happening. So from a standpoint of the players, obviously that's just a boost, man. If Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are going to see 8 to 10 targets each a game, we would have all been drafting them in the 2nd and 3rd round of fantasy drafts, and you were getting them in the 5th round in 12-man leagues quite often. There were a few times they'd sneak into the 4th, so you should be super happy right now if you are a Tyler Lockett owner or a DK Metcalf owner, and they were already worth the pick where they were because of the efficiency they bring to the table, and now you're going to get more volume out of them. So if you own those guys, you just keep plugging them in. If the price stays down in DFS, again, I haven't checked it yet, I'm absolutely going to be rocking with these guys. The backfield was a little bit of a split this last week, but Carson did get involved, in the passing game. That helped him out. So I think he can continue to do a little bit of that. I don't expect as much as last week, but when you have all these receivers going vertical and running everybody off, and you see what it can do for the efficiency. You can have some really big plays in the passing game, even from the underneath perspective, even with a guy like Chris Carson, who we don't really think of as being this great receiver.
Yeah, I mean, the fact DJ Dallas was, not even out there on the field, gave Carson that pass game role. So even though, our kind of fears came true with Hyde playing almost that Rashad Penny 1B role on the early downs, Carson had more than enough receiving work to make up for it. Ultimately, if they let Russ cook, okay, you're not going to get the same amount of rush attempts, but the scoring and, should be so much more through the roof that you would think that Carson can still provide consistent RB2 value. Although, I think his days, being a legit RB1 option likely over. All right, final game here, everyone. Thanks for sticking around with us. Saints at Raiders. Saints started at 4.5 up to -5.5 now. Over under sitting at 50.5. So the Saints got the win. A win is a win is a win, but I'm a little concerned about their offense. And it's also just a testament to the Tampa Bay defense, which is really good. I mean, Carlton Davis, for him to shut down Michael Thomas in that manner, and they got all those beasts back on the defensive line. kudos to them, but the Saints averaged 4.1 yards per play in week one. Only the Washington football team was worse. It's kind of hilarious that the two, least efficient offenses were able to escape with a win in week one, but it just wasn't good, man. And only the Seahawks faced a higher percentage of plays with at least 8 men in the box per rush attempt. And, for the Seahawks, that makes sense. The Falcons probably figured that they just wouldn't pass, but for the Saints, it makes me think, okay, our defense is all of a sudden just daring Brees to throw downfield, because I feel like that's what we've seen in these last two playoff exits. I mean, the Vikings just, sitting at the line, hey, we're going to take away all the easy short stuff to Thomas and Kamara that you make your living on every year and try to throw the ball over the head. So, we've seen Peyton start to kind of get, just fidgety almost and dial up these trick plays with Taysom Hill to try to put some pressure on the back end of the defense. And I mean, again, you look at Brees' regular season stats over the last few years, and he's as good as ever, but I think we can all agree that the guy doesn't have quite the same deep ball these days. So I don't think the Raiders are in position to, hold this Saints offense under 30 points. This isn't the week that we really need to worry about this, but it's something to pay attention to. I mean, they've never been an offense that have live and die with the deep ball or anything, but if defenses truly are saying, okay, Mr. 40-plus-year-old QB, we're daring you to throw it deep now. No Michael Thomas, for a couple weeks to help make life easier underneath. I'm just not super convinced that the Saints, are going to be this top 5 juggernaut this year after 1 week. Again, maybe it's, this will look silly in a few weeks, but keep an eye on the Saints offense. It was not a good debut. Dwain, thoughts on if you kind of had similar takeaways for the Saints, and then hit me with your Raiders.
Yeah, with the Saints, I mean, what we're hearing here just recently, is that it does sound like Michael Thomas may miss some extended time. So the high ankle sprain is worse than what they thought, which is typical. When a player gets the high ankle sprain, they think they can play through it during the game. You got adrenaline, it's still loose. And then you come back the next day or the day after, it's usually 2 days after, and all of a sudden it's super stiff and you've got a problem. So it sounds like Thomas is going to be out a while. So Emmanuel Sanders, obviously, is the guy that's going to see more work. Jared Cook's going to see more work. And of course, Alvin Kamara is going to Alvin Kamara. So I still like all those guys. I'm very interested, though, to see this defense play against the Raiders. The Raiders really got to play against, a young defense with a brand new scheme, a ton of new players. And they torched them, So, I mean, they really took care of business, versus the Panthers. 77% of the plays were within 3 points. And that's the thing. The Raiders never could fully put them away, though. And to your point around the defense, the defense for the Raiders, I mean, that's also a brand new offense for the Panthers. Now, they've got some playmakers for sure that we both probably like a lot. But, man, they just couldn't ever pull away. So that worries me with the Raiders when you get into these matchups against better teams. Last week, they ran the ball 51% of the time and passed 49%. That's in a close game. John Gruden's showing you what he wants to do. He wants to pound the rock. He wants to set up play action. 37% of pass attempts were play action last week. So that's really good for your receivers. That's great if Henry Ruggs is healthy. Allows him to sneak in behind, those linebackers and in front of the safeties, those 15, 20-yard crossers. Man, I mean, Ruggs is perfect for it. So let's just hope that Ruggs' injury, which he did come back and play, let's see what he looks like in practice this week. But Ruggs is a guy, man, that I am super excited about in this offense. So let's talk about Josh Jacobs. Obviously, if you took Josh Jacobs in the early second round, late first round, you're loving life this week. I will say Jacobs looked great, and his talent has never been a question, right? It's just a question of, how's Gruden going to use him? The only thing I'll say is I don't think we still fully know. Even though he got the targets that he got, the game stayed close the whole time. And if you look at it, on 3rd and 4th down, 7+ yards or more, he was only on the field for 33% of those. That went to Devontae Booker and Jalen Richard. So again, we'll see when you get into a situation where maybe it's this week against the Saints, who are also going to give them a better, test defensively, just as far as running the ball against them. Let's see what it looks like with Jacobs. Obviously, you're starting him. You're getting him in there. I'm not going to go overpay for him, in DFS, though, in this matchup. Last week, I used him everywhere. It made sense, right? He was chalk, but he was affordable. You could get him in there and still do a lot of interesting things with your lineup and still win some money. So this week, I'm going to be a lot more careful. Obviously, again, season long, you're plugging away Josh Jacobs. You love the guy. I'm just saying, keep an eye on it. What I want to see is that they get down 14 points. Sorry if you're a Raiders fan. I just want this information for fantasy. And I want to see that he's still out there because they literally didn't have to run the 2-minute offense at all. So we have no clue what they're going to do in that situation. My gut says it's going to be Jalen Richard, just based on what they did on 3rd and 4th downs. Now, Jacobs gets everything inside the 5. And the one other positive I'll give him, Ian, is on the targets he did have. they weren't checkdowns. They were actually, he was the first read. So they were designed to get the ball to him. So that means that even if these other rules go away, he's going to catch more balls than he did last year. It's just a range of outcomes thing, right? Because the upside is if he's going to be on the field almost all the time, he could be RB1. Right? But if he's going to be more in the middle where he's going to get some plays designed for him, it won't be as bad as last year. He's probably going to be, depending on the matchup every week, he'll always have an RB1 upside because of touchdowns, top overall. But I think you're more going to consistently see him in that 6 to 12 range, and you're going to have some weeks where he's going to fall down into the, outside of the top 12 running backs, depending on the matchup and if the Raiders fall behind early.
Yeah, look, I think Saquon is the league's best RB with the ball in his hands. I know this doesn't sound great after watching Monday night, but Jacobs needs to be in that conversation. Last year, only Nick Chubb broke more tackles on the season. That was despite Jacobs missing 3 games. And in week 1, nobody had more broken tackles than Jacobs. But yeah, dude, I had this same, just awful pit in my stomach today when I figured this out and was just like, oh crap, this really isn't guaranteed, because we only have to go back to 2019 to find a week 1 where Jacobs scored multiple touchdowns and commanded more than 70% of the offensive snaps, because they had a great game against the Broncos. They got up and Jacobs did his thing. What happened the next 2 weeks? Double-digit losses, and Jacobs played 48% of the snaps in week 2, 42% in week 3. It certainly seems like, Booker's just taking that DeAndre Washington role. They didn't, re-sign Richard to just not ever give him the ball. So unfortunately, like yourself, man, I do think we're going to see this dip down closer to that, 50-60% range and less ideal matchups. But, that type of talent, again, yeah, he's not leaving your starting lineup, not even if there's a fire. So that's going to do it, everyone. We have made it through all 16 games, like a little over an hour, but we tried to keep it short for y'all. Hope everyone enjoyed. Dwain, thank you again for coming on, man. What else? What do you have? Excuse me, coming out the rest of the week?
Well, the utilization report will be coming out, obviously, for Pro Football Focus. There'll be an article on it. You can also check me out at the Fantasy Football Hustle. So I've got the podcast there. You can find that on YouTube. You can also find it, anywhere that's streaming. We'll have to get Ian over there on it one of these days and, bust it up with Ian and let him, do some body slams on my co-host, Brian Drake.
Sounds good, man. Anytime. Everyone follow Dwain on Twitter at Dwain McFarland. You might know him better as Context Matters. That's going to do it, everyone. Before we go, I just want to say, take a look at the other PFF podcasts we have to offer. The PFF NFL podcast, the PFF Forecast, 2-for-1 drafts, unexpected points with Kevin Cole, the PFF College Football podcast with Seth Galina, and soon enough, we're even going to have the Chris Collinsworth podcast and the PFF Daily Betting Podcast. So be on the lookout for our entire PFF podcast network if you like what you've heard today. I'm Ian Hartitz. He's Dwain McFarland. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.